Caroline Levitt stepped up to the podium, poised and composed, as another routine press briefing began. The room was filled with seasoned reporters, their fingers poised over keyboards, their expressions expectant yet indifferent, as they prepared for yet another standard session of questions and answers. Caroline had done this many times before. She was articulate, confident, and professional, accustomed to the ebb and flow of inquiries about policies, governance, and national matters. The atmosphere was typical. Reporters asked their questions, she responded with clarity, and the cycle repeated in an orderly, almost predictable manner. The usual topics emerged: economic strategies, legislative updates, and foreign affairs. Despite the occasional pointed question, everything was business as usual. That was until, near the end of the briefing, an unexpected shift occurred. A reporter, his voice edged with an unmistakable smirk, raised his hand, cutting through the normalcy of the event with a question that no one anticipated. It was not about policies, not about government decisions or national concerns. It was personal. His words, laced with sarcasm, disrupted the flow of the session. "No cross today?" he asked loudly, his expression barely concealing his amusement. "I guess the faith was just a prop, huh?" The words hung in the air like an unwelcome storm cloud, halting the previously fluid exchange between speaker and press. A sudden, almost eerie silence gripped the room. The clicking of keyboards ceased mid-sentence, murmurs and whispers died out, and dozens of eyes turned toward Caroline, waiting to see how she would respond. The weight of the question settled over the room, not because it was an insightful inquiry, but because of the line it had crossed. The question was not professional. It was an attack, a challenge wrapped in mockery intended to provoke a reaction. The atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation. Some reporters exchanged glances, others froze, unsure whether this was a moment of reckless antagonism or if it would spiral into something greater. It was clear that this was no longer just a press briefing, it was a test. A moment that could define Caroline's stance not just as a public figure, but as an individual. The energy in the room had shifted, and everyone was aware of it. The question was not just directed at Caroline. It seemed to target something more profound, something deeply personal. In that moment, every reporter, every camera, and every microphone was fixated on her, awaiting her response. The expectation of a heated reaction loomed over the space, but instead of immediate rebuttal or defensiveness, Caroline paused, just for a second. It was in that pause that the room held its breath, anticipating how she would choose to respond to what had just transpired. The question had been asked, and in its wake, silence took over the room, stretching into an almost unbearable stillness. The atmosphere, once routine and predictable, had shifted in an instant, now thick with unspoken tension. The smirk on the reporter's face lingered as if he relished the impact of his words, fully aware of the line he had just crossed. His voice had not been one of genuine curiosity, but of mockery, dripping with sarcasm, designed not to elicit an answer, but to provoke a reaction. His gaze remained locked onto Caroline, waiting, expecting her composure to falter. Around the room, the expressions of others varied. Some reporters darted glances at one another, uncertain whether to engage or remain silent, while others leaned forward slightly, sensing the gravity of the moment. This was no longer about policies or governance. It was now about something far more personal. A direct attack had been made, and everyone in the room could feel it. Some reporters had been in the profession long enough to recognize a moment like this, one that had the potential to spiral out of control, to become the story rather than simply being part of a press briefing. The weight of the question hung in the air, its implications lingering, waiting to be addressed. The tension crackled like static electricity, the kind of charge that precedes an inevitable storm. Caroline, however, did not react as expected. There was no immediate rebuttal, no anger flashing across her face, no hint of flustered defensiveness. Instead, she held still, her presence unwavering. The pause she took was not one of hesitation but of measured thought, a deliberate silence that carried more weight than words could. Her eyes met the reporter's, steady and firm, neither confrontational nor retreating. Then, with an air of quiet authority, she simply responded, "Next question, please. It's irrelevant." Her voice was even, her tone neither sharp nor dismissive, but rather definitive, as if making it clear that she would not allow the moment to dictate her response. But the reporter was not finished. He leaned forward slightly, emboldened by what he perceived as an evasion. Irrelevant? He repeated, this time louder, his voice carrying a challenging edge. I think it's pretty relevant. Looks to me like your faith was just for show all along. His words cut through the room like a blade, sharper than before, meant to dig deeper, to force her into a position where she would have to defend herself. The subtle but undeniable sound of gasps rippled through the crowd, soft but perceptible, a collective intake of breath as the weight of his accusation fully settled. The intensity of the moment escalated. This was no longer just a provocative question. It was a direct challenge to her integrity, an assertion meant to undermine her authenticity. The room, now entirely focused on Karoline, was devoid of any other noise. No one was typing, no whispered side conversations persisted. The stillness was nearly suffocating, yet she remained unfazed. Where others might have faltered, where frustration or defensiveness might have surfaced, she instead exuded an unshakable calm. And then, finally, she spoke again, not with the force of outrage, but with the quiet power of conviction. Yesterday, she began, her voice carrying an unwavering steadiness, one of your colleagues suggested that I take off the cross I wear around my neck. He said it might be seen as political, that it might distract from the issues we're here to discuss. Her words, deliberate and measured, hung in the air, slowly shifting the weight of the moment. Some reporters lowered their pens. Others looked on with renewed interest. She continued, I told him, as I'll tell you now, that the cross I wear is not a political statement. It's not for anyone else's approval. It's an expression of my love for Jesus Christ. It's personal. It's sacred. The whispers that had begun to ripple moments earlier faded entirely, as if absorbed by the gravity of her words. It was no longer the reporter in control of the conversation. It was her. The power had shifted, not through defensiveness or aggression, but through quiet certainty. Her words carried weight, not because they were spoken loudly, but because they were spoken with absolute conviction. She had not engaged in a verbal battle. She had simply stated the truth as she knew it, and in doing so, she had effectively turned the moment into something far greater than a simple exchange between a reporter and a public figure. The tension had not dissipated, but it had transformed. It was no longer the uncomfortable, confrontational charge that had filled the room moments before. It was something deeper, something reflective, something that made even those watching feel the impact of what had just been said. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium, unwavering, as the weight of the moment settled over the room like a dense fog. The reporter's words still hung in the air, but she did not react with indignation or defensiveness. Instead, she maintained her steady posture, her expression composed but resolute. There was no flicker of anger, no visible frustration, just a measured stillness, as though she had already decided how to handle this moment before it even arrived. The silence stretched long enough for the tension to deepen, long enough for those in the room to sense that something significant was about to unfold. Then finally she spoke, her voice calm yet carrying a quiet force that seemed to cut through the charged atmosphere like a blade. Yesterday, she began, her gaze unwavering, her words deliberate. One of your colleagues suggested that I take off the cross I wear around my neck. He said it might be seen as political, that it might distract from the issues we're here to discuss. The room, which had been holding its collective breath, remained utterly still, every eye now fixed on her, every mind tuned into what she was about to say next. I told him, she continued, her voice gaining an almost imperceptible but undeniable strength, as I'll tell you now, that the cross I wear is not a political statement. It's not for anyone else's approval. It's an expression of my love for Jesus Christ. It's personal, it's sacred. The sincerity in her tone left no room for doubt. She was not here to argue, not here to prove anything to anyone. She was simply stating her truth. And in doing so, she had already shifted the power in the room. The faint murmurs that had begun earlier faded entirely, as if absorbed by the sheer weight of her conviction. Her words had not been loud, yet they carried more impact than any raised voice could have. The reporter, who had seemed so confident in his challenge just moments ago, suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar position, no longer the one controlling the exchange, no longer the one dictating the direction of the moment. Karoline let a brief pause settle, not to gather herself, but to allow the significance of what she had said to fully take root in the minds of those present. Then she continued, her voice steady but carrying a subtle intensity. "I didn't wear it today," she said, addressing the entire room now, "not because my faith changed, not because it wavered, but because I wanted to show you and everyone who might be watching that faith is not something you wear. It's not about a piece of jewelry. It's about how you live. It's about love. It's about truth." A shift could be felt in the energy of the room, the skepticism, the silent judgments, the expectation of a defensive rebuttal. None of it remained. Instead, there was a sense of reflection, of realization. She took a breath, her expression unshaken, her eyes scanning the faces in front of her. "And what's truly disgusting," she added, her voice unwavering but now carrying an unmistakable firmness, "is you mocking that." The impact of those words was immediate. A hush fell over the room so complete that the faint hum of the air conditioning became suddenly audible, a stark contrast to the tension that had existed only moments before. No one had expected her to take control of the moment in such a way, not by attacking, not by arguing, but by laying out the truth so plainly that it left no room for further dispute. One by one, the reporters lowered their pens, their laptops, their cameras. It was as if they had all come expecting one kind of confrontation and had instead been met with something entirely different, something they were not used to, something they could not easily twist or manipulate. So much they could not use to. Up. Even the reporter in question had fallen silent, his smug expression replaced by something that almost resembled regret. He opened his mouth slightly as if to respond, but no words came. Karoline, however, was not finished. "Faith," she said, addressing not just him but the entire room, her voice rising just slightly, "isn't about symbols. It's not about impressing anyone. It's about how you carry yourself, the choices you make, the way you treat other people. And it certainly isn't something up for debate in a press briefing." There was an authority in her words that could not be ignored, a strength that went beyond mere rhetoric. She was not asking for permission to believe what she believed. She was not seeking validation. She was simply standing firm in what she knew to be true. Her gaze swept across the room, her presence commanding yet not overpowering, firm yet without hostility. "You see," she continued, her hand moving to touch just above her heart, "my faith doesn't live in a cross around my neck. It lives here. It lives in the compassion I have for others, in the integrity I strive to maintain, in the truth I choose to speak, even when it's inconvenient." The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy but necessary realization. This was not just about her anymore. It was about the broader message she was sending, one that transcended the moment, one that forced those listening to reconsider their own perceptions. "A necklace is a reminder, yes," she admitted, "something deeply meaningful to me, but it is not the essence of who I am or what I believe." The stillness remained, unbroken, as her words sank in. The power of her statement did not come from aggression or defensiveness, but from its unwavering truth. It was a truth that needed no validation, no approval, no agreement. She had said what she needed to say, and that alone was enough. The silence in the room was no longer one of tension, but of quiet reflection. And then, after another brief pause, she looked directly at the reporter once more. There was no anger in her eyes, no resentment, only an unshakable certainty. "You mocked something sacred to me," she said, her tone serious but devoid of malice, "something deeply personal, and yet you haven't shaken me. My faith remains as strong as it was yesterday, as strong as it was the day before, and as strong as it will be tomorrow, because my faith isn't built on your perceptions. It's built on love." The room remained suspended in silence, and for the first time since the exchange had begun, the reporter looked away, as if suddenly unsure of himself. Karoline let the silence settle one final time before she took a step back, her gaze once again scanning the room. "Shall we move on to the next question?" she asked, her composure flawless, her presence unshaken. And with that she had not only reclaimed control of the room, but had left an impact that would extend far beyond it. The shift in the atmosphere was almost palpable. What had begun as a routine press briefing had transformed into something far more profound, something no one in the room had anticipated. The weight of Karoline Leavitt's words settled over the space like a dense fog, pressing down on the shoulders of everyone present. The usual rhythm of a press briefing, questions fired, answers given, a constant flow of information had been interrupted. But not by anger, not by outrage. Instead, it was an undeniable collective realization that something significant had just transpired. Reporters, many of whom had built their careers on skepticism and sharp questioning, now found themselves sitting in stunned silence, their pens lowered, their fingers hesitating over keyboards. Even the hum of camera shutters, the ever-present background noise of these briefings, had ceased. No one wanted to be the first to break the silence. No one wanted to disrupt the moment. The energy that had once been tense, charged with the anticipation of a confrontation, had now shifted into something else entirely. It was no longer a battle of words between a public figure and a persistent reporter. It had evolved into a lesson, an unplanned but powerful moment of reflection that left even the most seasoned journalists reevaluating their expectations. The reporter who had initiated the exchange, the one who had smirked so confidently when he posed his question, now sat with his expression changed. The smug amusement was gone, replaced by something more difficult to define, regret perhaps, or the realization that he had underestimated the response he would receive. His challenge had not been met with anger, nor had it been ignored. Instead, it had been turned into an opportunity for clarity, for truth, for a lesson in the quiet strength of conviction. Karoline had not needed to raise her voice or resort to defensiveness. She had not played into the expected script of hostility or debate. Instead, she had taken control of the moment by simply standing firm in her truth, speaking with a grace and certainty that had left no room for further argument. And in doing so, she had shifted the entire room. The power had moved from the reporter, from his attempt to provoke, back to her, not through force, but through the undeniable weight of sincerity. The shift was evident in the faces of those watching. The skepticism that had once lingered in their expressions had softened, replaced by something more introspective. Some nodded ever so slightly, acknowledging the validity of her words, while others simply sat, processing. No one interrupted. No one pressed further. Instead, there was a quiet admiration, a recognition that something had been said that could not be easily dismissed. It was rare in the world of press briefings for a moment to carry such weight, for a response to command such genuine attention. And yet, here it was, unfolding in real time, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Faith had been the focal point of the exchange, but Karoline Leavitt had made it clear that faith was not something performative, not something that existed for the approval or validation of others. Her words resonated in the room, carrying a weight that had little to do with religious ideology and everything to do with personal conviction. She had dismantled the shallow perception that faith could be reduced to a symbol, a mere accessory worn around one's neck, and instead redirected the conversation to what truly mattered: how faith is lived, how it is embodied in the choices one makes, and how it shapes the way one treats others. It was a lesson not just for the reporter who had tried to corner her, but for everyone in the room who had witnessed the exchange unfold. Faith, as Karoline expressed it, was not about grand gestures or outward displays meant to signal devotion. It was not about impressing others or about wielding belief as a weapon in the public sphere. True faith, she explained, lived in actions, in the quiet strength that sustains a person even when faced with mockery, in the integrity that refuses to be shaken by public scrutiny. There was something deeply moving about the way she spoke, her voice unwavering, not out of defiance, but out of absolute certainty. She did not seek to convert, nor did she seek to impose. She simply spoke her truth, making it clear that her faith was not a performance, but a deeply personal foundation upon which she built her life. It was not something to be debated in a press briefing, not something to be mocked or questioned as if it were a political strategy. And yet, she did not lash out against those who misunderstood. Instead, she expressed something even more powerful: pity. "What saddens me," she had said, her voice steady but laced with an undeniable sincerity, "is that we live in a time where faith, in any form, is so misunderstood, so quickly mocked. And I feel sorry for those who choose to tear it down because they've missed the point entirely." That statement alone had shifted the energy in the room once again. She was not defensive, nor was she seeking to win an argument. She was offering something deeper, a moment of reflection, an invitation for others to reconsider their approach to faith, whether their own or someone else's. Faith, she continued, was not about making oneself seen or celebrated. It did not demand to be acknowledged or approved by the world. It was not loud, nor did it seek to be dominant. Instead, it was something quiet, something internal, something that gave peace when everything around a person was chaos. It was what gave strength when people tried their hardest to strip it away. Those words settled heavily over the room, not as a reprimand, but as a truth so undeniable that even those who had come in skeptical now sat in silence, absorbing it. She had taken what could have been a divisive, combative moment and turned it into something else entirely. An opportunity to remind those in the room and anyone who would hear her words later that faith was not about outward perception, but about an inner certainty that no amount of questioning could shake. And with that, she had made her point not through argument, but through the sheer force of quiet, unshakable belief. The impact of Karoline Leavitt's words did not end in that briefing room. What had begun as an attempt to undermine her faith had instead become a defining moment, one that transcended the walls of that press conference and rippled far beyond. The reporters, who had initially arrived expecting just another routine briefing, left with something else entirely, a story that was no longer about policy or politics, but about conviction, about grace under pressure, about the quiet power of unwavering belief. The exchange spread quickly, making its way into news articles, opinion pieces, and social media discussions. Some praised her strength, admiring the way she had turned an intended moment of humiliation into one of inspiration. Others, even those who did not share her faith, found themselves moved by her ability to remain composed and articulate in the face of public scrutiny. Her words, unshaken by provocation, reminded many of the power of personal integrity and the importance of standing firm in one's values. What had initially been an attempt to discredit her had instead reinforced her credibility, proving that true faith is not about winning arguments, but about living one's truth with dignity. In a world that often rewards outrage, Karoline Leavitt had chosen something different, and in doing so, she had left an indelible mark. Karoline Leavitt's story carries a profound lesson that transcends the specific moment in which it took place. It is a reminder that true strength is not found in loud arguments or heated debates, but in the quiet conviction of one's values. In life, there will always be people who question, doubt, or even mock our beliefs, whether they are rooted in faith, principles, or personal experiences. However, dignity is not found in proving them wrong, but in remaining steadfast, unshaken by external pressures. For those who have lived through decades of challenges, this lesson is especially relevant. Over time, we learn that wisdom does not lie in reacting to every slight or provocation, but in knowing when to speak and how to do so with grace. Karoline's response was not just about defending her faith. It was about demonstrating integrity, about showing that what truly matters is not the symbols we wear, but the way we live. This is something all of us can apply to our own lives. Whether in the face of criticism, skepticism, or misunderstanding, the way we carry ourselves speaks louder than any argument we could make. In a world that often rewards hostility, choosing composure, kindness, and truth is the mark of real wisdom.